Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fifth module of Electricity Market Training Program organized by CPPA in collaboration with Apex. My name is Abrar Hussain. I am part of the market design team here at CPPA. Majority of my work at CPPA is regarding the development of a framework for establishment of the competitive wholesale market in Pakistan. During this journey, I have delivered several trainings to enhance the understanding of the stakeholders regarding the design and operations of the competitive electricity markets. I am really excited to be part of this program in order to share the knowledge and insights that I have gained through this journey. So, let's start with a quick introduction of the session. It is divided into two submodules. The first submodule will focus on bilateral contracts, while the second submodule will cover the intricacies of the power pools. In the first submodule, we will develop comprehensive understandings of various features of bilateral contracts and their implication in competitive markets. We will be covering several topics to enhance your knowledge regarding bilateral contracts. Firstly, we will describe the features of standardized as well as customized contracts, which will enable you to understand the key elements of these contracts. We will also understand the advantages and the risks associated with the adoption of any of these types of contracts. We will also learn about the price discovery mechanism and the role of the price reporting agencies. We will delve into the distinction between the forward and spot markets. One of the most important aspects of bilateral contracts is evaluating their profitability. We will go through several examples to evaluate the profitability of a bilateral contract and will introduce several key terms such as spark spread, dark spread, market heat rate and cost of cover. Next, we will analyze the profitability of different types of generators on the grid through construction and interpretation of the price duration curve. We will also introduce the scarcity pricing concept by defining the scarcity pricing and explaining the mechanism for setting the market price during scarcity. We will further explore the supply stack model to understand the sensitivity of electricity prices with respect to the changes in the underlying factors in the market. Lastly, we will discuss the distinctive features of electricity prices such as price spikes, time varying volatility, mean reversion and locational basis. By understanding these characteristics, you will be able to explain their origins and implications. So, by the end of this submodule, you will have a comprehensive understanding of bilateral contracts in electricity markets, their features, pricing mechanisms, profitability assessment, risk evaluation and other related topics. So, let's begin this exciting journey together regarding understanding of bilateral contracts in electricity markets. With the increase in complexity and sophistication in competitive electricity markets, there are several avenues to buy or sell electricity. For example, if you are a factory, you can buy the required energy for the upcoming shift in the day-ahead market in an exchange, or you can wait and buy at the real-time market, or you can meet a seller through an online trading platform. Alternatively, you can plan this in advance and agree a deal with the seller who agree to provide you this energy at a price that is suitable to you. Same is the case for the seller who can sell their energy through all those means that I mentioned earlier. This module is focused on the avenue of bilateral contracts, where a buyer and a seller agrees to the sale and purchase of a specific quantum. These contracts play very important role and are considered as the cornerstone of the trading in competitive markets. What makes them fascinating is their versatility. Bilateral contracts encompass a variety of products, including energy, capacity, and ancillary services. This is where the intricacies come into play, and it's crucial to comprehend how they work. Now, who are the main players in these bilateral contracts? It's a diverse mix including generators, traders, retailers and consumers. Each of these parties plays a significant role in shaping these agreements and consequently the market as a whole. The bilateral market is a place where contracts are negotiated and agreed bilaterally between the buyers and the sellers. This bilateral market exists in a variety of structures. For example, a vertically integrated utility such as K Electric in Pakistan develops and operates its own generation fleet, but it also signs contracts with independent power producers to fulfill some of its requirements. A utility company having surplus generation may negotiate a deal with the neighboring country to export the surplus generation, such as India is exporting to Bangladesh. The market structures in the two countries would be significantly different. A factory may be interested in fixing its energy cost and will sign a deal with a retailer who may be purchasing this in an exchange or through a bilateral contract with a generator. In a nutshell, bilateral contracts exist in a variety of market structures. Now, this is natural to ask that why these entities are going for bilateral contracts. What are those benefits? The answer is that these bilateral contracts offer a number of benefits to both the buyers and sellers. You will understand in more detail once we complete this part. However, in its more simplistic way, we can say that the benefit for the buyer is that bilateral contracts provide a way to secure a supply of electricity at a fixed price, which can help to manage risks and budget for energy costs. The benefit for the seller is that the bilateral contracts can provide a guaranteed market for their electricity, which can help them to finance new generation projects as there will be guaranteed revenue through the contract. Now, let's discuss the types of contracts. There are two types, structured and standardized. Structured contracts, as the name suggests, are meticulously tailored agreements. In majority of the cases, these contracts are established between a generation owner and a retail load serving entity. Structured contracts are characterized by their extensive intricacies and they often span over 2 or 3 decades. These contracts demand extensive and delicate negotiations. Detailed documentation is essential to outline the obligations and contingencies. They are designed to specify operational details based on fluctuating demand and fuel availability, ensuring a long-term stable energy supply. In short, these contracts encompass the requirements of the buyer as well as the seller with extensive detail. As opposed to the structured contracts, these standardized contracts are streamlined, simplified agreements in the energy industry. These contracts are typically used for straightforward transactions involving power or other energy products. These contracts specify key elements such as the price, quantity, and the location for delivery. They provide firm power, meaning that they come with very few contingencies which enhance the level of predictability. They can be agreed upon through various means, whether verbally, electronically, or even through computer algorithms. Standardized contracts revolve around predefined terms and they require an established commercial framework where the necessary instruments are available to undertake these transactions. Now, with the introduction given above, here we will briefly discuss the advantages and challenges of the standardized contract. We will cover the details of structured contracts a bit later when we have made ourselves familiarized with certain concepts and terms which will help us in understanding those details. In the bilateral contract market, the buyers and sellers always have the flexibility to customize the terms of the contracts to suit their specific needs. However, both the buyer and the seller often find value in standardizing the contract in line with the industry's customary practice in their country or region. These standardized contracts are typically developed by the trade associations or other industry groups, and they are designed to reflect the customary practices of the industry. Different regions and countries will have different customary practices that shape the terms used in a standardized contract. For example, in Australia and New Zealand, a peak load contract covers the 15-hour block of time from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays, whereas in Japan, it is the 4-hour block from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. In some cases, the government also imposed standardization, or the standardization is imposed by certain institution with responsibilities for key parts of the system central to trading. For example, a government may specify standardized contract terms for trading power across an interconnect between two countries. However, even where these standardization needs to be imposed, it shall be structured in a way to fit the needs of existing structures of trade, such as the two frameworks on the two sides of the interconnect, which may be different from one another. Now the benefits. Standardized contracts enhance liquidity, which means that they make it easier for buyers and sellers to find each other and to execute deals. Standardized contracts also reduce certain costs, such as they can save time and money for both buyers and sellers because they do not have to negotiate and draft the contract from the scratch. Transparency is also enhanced because standardized contracts make it easier to compare prices and other terms across different deals. Standardized contracts also reduce the risks because such contracts have been carefully drafted by legal professionals to address common risks and concerns. Now the challenges. Besides all these advantages, these standardized contracts come with the cost of limited flexibility. Standardized contracts may not be able to accommodate all of the specific needs of the parties involved in a particular deal. So, in summary, standardized contracts have many advantages. However, they come with the challenge of limited flexibility. With the understanding that we have developed so far regarding bilateral contracts, one astounding feature that is common among all types of bilateral contracts is that they are privately negotiated. You can negotiate a better deal only if you have information about other players, that how they are negotiating their deals and what are the prices in the market. You will adjust your buying or selling strategy as per the conditions of the market. For example, if other players are selling the same product at $100 per unit and you are asking for $110, you may not be able to sell it. Similarly, if other players are buying the same product at $100 per unit, you may not be able to buy it at $90. Finding about all those deals and the prices in the market on your own is costly and time consuming. Even some market players may not be interested in sharing the information with you. This needs to make available the information on the deals being made in private to all market players have given rise to the special business called the price reporting agencies. These are private companies specialized in gathering information regarding various deals being made in the market and disseminate this information in the market to help market players make better trading decisions. They enhance information symmetry in the market, which increase transparency and fairness because there is no undue advantage to any player because the same information is available to all. The price reporting agencies have several sources of information. One source is that they collect this information from the market participants through confidential communications. A question may come in mind that why a market participant will be interested in sharing information with the PRA. There is an incentive because he will also be interested in knowing about the deals being made by other market participants. In this way, all the market participants share information with the PRAs and the PRAs provide the overall price of the market to all market participants. That is, everyone participates because everyone participates. and the information makes all buyers and sellers better off. Another source is that they collect information from the electronic trading platforms. A third source is the government filings, which is not as good as the other two sources because of the time lag. The price reporting agencies collect information on each individual deal and then calculate some kind of average called the price assessment, which characterize the going market price. The PRAs provide several benefits to the market such as improved transparency, fairness, information symmetry, efficiency in pricing, and trading and liquidity. However, the PRAs also face certain challenges. The first challenge is that the price assessment of the PRA shall be accurate and reliable, meaning that it shall be reflective of the actual demand and supply situation, and the market participants shall use it as a reference while making deals. Markets with greater number of participants involved are called thick markets, while markets with limited participation are called thin markets. Price assessments for thick markets are more reliable and accurate as compared to the thin markets, because in thin markets with limited number of deals, the assessment can be greatly influenced by a single deal. The great challenge for the PRA is to develop and maintain a robust and transparent methodology for calculating the market prices that always reflect the true picture of the market and is not influenced by the characteristics of few particular deals. A specific problem for price reporting agencies is the selection of the right formula for summarizing the data. As I said earlier, in order for the assessment to be meaningful and trustable for the market participants, it must reflect the actual trends in the market. It should avoid making much of the results of a single deal that happens to be unrepresentative of the general market. For example, a particular trade by a particular generator may happen to reflect specific transmission line problem in its local area and may not be very pertinent to the price that other generators could obtain if they are located in the same country but outside that local area. One solution to the problem is to calculate a price index, which is some formulaic average of other prices. Anyone can construct their own index, and different PRAs compete to develop the most useful indexes. As prices vary across regions due to transportation costs and constraints. For example, the price of wheat will be different in the area where it is produced, such as Punjab in the case of Pakistan. This price would be different than an area where it is consumed, such as the far-flung areas and mountainous regions of KP. Same is the case in electricity, that we have lot of low cost hydros in the north, while we still have to run expensive generation in Karachi and Lahore because of the transportation constraints. Therefore, different price indexes can be established for different regions. A common terminology used is the zonal price and hub price. The zonal price is the price of a predefined region within the overall market, such as Brazil has 4 zonal prices, while the hub price is the price of the wholesale market accessible to majority of the market participants, such as the Henry hub prices in gas market in US. This is a typical example of the price assessment reported by the price reporting agencies for a base load contract. Up to now, we have understood that the market participants negotiate deals privately, and the price reporting agencies collect and publish this information and calculate price assessments. In both of these activities, the actual deal being made by the participants as well as the price assessments of the PRAs, there is a time element involved. The deals and the assessments could be for the next hour or day, or could be for some date in the future. In this section, we will differentiate the markets with respect to time. With respect to time of delivery, the markets are characterized as spot market and forward markets. Contracts could include deals for immediate delivery. In electricity market, this immediate could be the next hour or the next day. The markets where these contracts for immediate delivery are executed are called the spot markets, and the price in the spot market is called the spot price. On the other hand, the contracts can specify some future date of delivery, for example, next month or next summer peak. The market where the contracts for delivery in the future are traded is called the forward market, and the price in this market is called the forward price. The customary name is singular. However, there are multiple forward markets. For example, a month ahead or a quarter ahead or a year ahead market are all forward markets. This is another typical example of the price assessment reported by a price reporting agency for different markets differentiated with respect to time of delivery. For example, day ahead and with some blocks, weekend, September, October, and many more future markets. Now, let us talk about the advantages of spot markets. Spot markets are the most liquid markets, so it is easy to find buyers and sellers for assets. Spot market prices are transparent and are widely reported in the media. Spot markets are efficient, meaning that prices are determined by the forces of supply and demand. Now, the advantages of forward markets. The first obvious advantage is the price hedging, meaning that the forward markets allow buyers and sellers to lock in a price for an asset at a future date. This can be useful for businesses and investors who want to hedge against price risk. Another advantage is the speculations in the market. The forward markets allow traders to speculate on the future prices of assets and thus enhance liquidity. So, in conclusion, the spot market is usually significantly more liquid than the forward market, and there are usually spot markets in more locations than there are forward markets. So, spot markets often get more coverage and are analyzed in more detail than forward markets. The exact terms of a spot contract varies across regions and countries and reflect customary industry characteristics. The set of forward contracts also varies. With the understanding developed so far regarding number 1, bilateral contracts through which prices and quantities can be locked. Number 2, the price assessments for the electricity and fuel markets, and number 3, the understanding of the spot and forward markets. So, with this knowledge, we have the necessary understanding to assess the profitability of a contract. But before doing that, we need to get ourselves familiarized with certain terms that are used in the industry. The first term we will introduce is called the spark spread. But first we will define what actually the term spread means. The profitability of thermal generators depend on the spread between the wholesale electricity price and the cost of fuel. Spread is the gross margin of a generator on the per unit of electricity sold in the wholesale market. It is the difference between the price of electricity in the market and the cost incurred in producing that unit. Historically, the thermal power generation was dominated by coal fired or gas fired generators. Therefore, the term spark spread is a specific type of spread that measures the profitability of a natural gas fired power plant. Spark spread is calculated by subtracting the cost of natural gas from the wholesale electricity price. Spark spread can be negative or positive. If the spark spread is negative, the generator loses money and there is no point to operate on negative spread. If spark spread is positive, the generator makes money. If spark spread is small on a particular day, electricity production might be delayed until a more profitable spread arises. Now, how to calculate it? Spark spread is equal to the electricity price in dollar per megawatt hour minus the marginal cost of gas in dollar per megawatt hour. The marginal cost of gas can be calculated based on the fuel cost and the heat rate, which you have understood in our last lectures. In simple words, it is the amount of fuel needed to produce 1 unit of energy by the specific generation plant. Also, from the previous lectures, you know the relation between heat rate and efficiency. So, we can rewrite the formula as this. Please note that you have to be very careful with the units. In the first formula, the marginal cost of gas is measured per megawatt hour of electricity generated, which should be distinguished from the price of gas, which can be quoted as per megawatt hour of heat content, like the case in the last formula. The price of gas is given in dollar per megawatt hour of heat content. It is the thermal efficiency which converts this in dollar per megawatt hour of electricity. Let's look at an example. Suppose a power plant sells electricity at $51.35 per megawatt hour. The plant uses natural gas to generate electricity, and the current cost of natural gas is $5 per MMBTU. Additionally, the plant's heat rate is 8530 BTU per kilowatt hour, which means it requires that much of fuel to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So, how do we calculate the spark spread? First, we need to calculate the marginal cost of fuel. We do this by multiplying the natural gas price by the heat rate. Marginal cost of fuel is equal to $5 per MMBTU multiplied by the heat rate, which is 8530 BTU per kilowatt hour, and we divide it by 1000 to adjust for the units. So, the marginal cost come out to be $42.65 per megawatt hour. Now, we can calculate the spark spread. The spark spread is equal to $51.35 per megawatt hour, which is the wholesale price, minus $42.65 per megawatt hour, which is the marginal cost of gas, and this equals to $8.7 per megawatt hour. What does this mean? This means that the spark spread is $8.7 per megawatt hour. This indicates that this power plant is making a profit of $8.7 for every megawatt hour of electricity it produces. That was the most simplistic case example that we discussed. However, beside fuel, there are other costs also associated with the production of electricity. For example, there is a small portion of O&M costs which shall also be taken into account. So, we have two types of heat rates. One is called the operating heat rate, which is the simplest heat rate that we used in the previous example, which only considers the fuel cost. The economic heat rate is slightly higher number, which also takes into account the other variable costs. In case you are using the operating heat rate to calculate the spread, then your spark spread should be at least positive enough to cover the difference between the economic heat rate and the operating heat rate. The economic heat rate is not the actual heat rate of the generation plant, but a measure of profitability of the generation plant. If you use the economic heat rate in calculation of the spark spread instead of the operating heat rate, then the plant is profitable whenever your spark spread is positive. While in the previous case, as I said earlier, when we were using the operating heat rate, it should be at least positive enough to cover the difference between the economic heat rate and the operating heat rate. Now, how to calculate the economic heat rate? We know that the total marginal cost is equal to the economic heat rate multiplied by the gas price. The total marginal cost is a combination of the marginal fuel costs and other marginal operating costs. As we already know that the marginal fuel costs are equal to the operating heat rate multiplied by the gas price. So, by dividing both sides by the term gas price, we get economic heat rate as operating heat rate plus other marginal cost divided by the gas price. So, it is a slightly higher number than the operating heat rate. Another important term used in the industry is the marginal heat rate, which is defined as the heat rate which sets the spark spread to 0. This is also called the market heat rate. On any day, if the heat rate of your generator is below the market heat rate, your spark spread will be positive and it is profitable to operate and vice versa. The spread also varies with the level of output. As you already know from the previous sessions that the heat rate is not the same at all output level. At full load, the heat rate is lower as compared to partial loading. This term of market heat rate is also reported in various assessments. This is another typical example of the assessment reported by the price reporting agency. They normally report the marginal heat rate also along the spark spread. Another important term used in electricity markets is the dark spread. It is the same as spark spread with the only difference that the fuel under consideration is coal. So, we will not go into the details of the explanation and calculations because they are the same as we did for the spark spread. With the introduction of the carbon pricing, another term used in the market is clean spread, which is the spread calculated by duly considering the cost of emissions as well. For example, if there is $1 per megawatt hour tax on coal based generation, then the clean dark spread will always be $1 lower than the dark spread, or alternatively the dark spread have to be at least $1 positive in order to avoid any loss for this generator in order to sell in the market. Continuing with the terms, another important concept is the cost of cover, which can be explained as the following. Time of delivery is often a key consideration in electric power markets. Sometimes generation owner has advanced notice that it will have to take the plant offline and that it will be unable to provide the power promised in the contract. In that case, it is likely that one of the two sides, either the buyer or the seller, has ample time to go to the market and find replacement power. However, in some cases, there is insufficient notice. For example, in a sudden force outage case, in some cases like this, the failure is so sudden that it is impossible to go to market and find replacement power before the hour it was needed has passed. The shortfall in generation may have been made up by the system operator or some other party using resources specifically identified to provide reserve power on short notice. In these cases, there will be a price charged for turning to the reserve resources and that becomes the cost of cover. How the price charged for the use of reserve resources is determined varies widely across regions and countries. The main point here is that the correct cost of cover depends upon the opportunity to replace the missing power. When there is an available market, the market price is the cost of cover. when some other alternative such as reserve resources must be used, then the cost of this other alternative is the cost of cover. Timing is often the major factor determining whether a market is available or not. With plenty of lead time, a market is likely to be available in many regions or countries. As the moment of delivery approaches and lead time is fast disappearing, the bilateral market may not be available and other mechanisms becomes the focus, such as the imbalance market or the reserve resources. So, the main uh, point here is that the cost of cover is the key element of the firm power contracts, which protects the buyer from the market risk in case of failure of the seller. It is the seller in the firm power contracts who have to bear this cost. Got a bit confused? Let us explain this with the help of an example. A seller sells 15 megawatt hour at a price of $35 per megawatt hour. So, the total revenue from the contract is $525. However, in real time he is able to produce only 6 megawatt hour and there is a shortfall of 9 megawatt hours. The market price is $43 per megawatt hour. By multiplying this price with the shortfall amount, the cost of cover is $387, resulting in a $8 per megawatt hour price. This $8 per megawatt hour is the difference between the market price and the contract price. Multiplying this $8 per megawatt hour with the shortfall amount, the net cost of cover that the seller has to bear is $72. Now, there are two ways for the buyers and sellers to make the payment in this case. In alternative 1, the seller delivers the whole 15 megawatt hour and receives the contract price, which results in the total revenue of $525. The seller then pays the total cost of cover for the shortfall amount to the market, which is $387, which comes out as multiplying 9 by 43. So, the revenue net of the cost of cover for the seller is 525 minus 387, which is $138. In alternative 2, the seller only provides the quantity that it has produced itself and get the revenue for that on the contract price. So, the total revenue it gets is 6 multiplied by 35, which is the contract price, and the total amount is $210. Now, as the buyer has purchased the remaining amount from the market at a price higher than the contract price, the seller has to compensate for the difference, which is $8 per megawatt hour in this case. So, the seller pays to the buyer $8 on each megawatt hour of shortfall, and as there is 9 megawatt hour shortfall, so a total amount of $72 is paid by the seller to the buyer. So, the revenue for the seller is still the same, which is obtained by subtracting 72 from the revenue of $210, which is $138. So, in both the cases, the revenue net of paying the cost of cover is $138. Now, that you have grasped the concepts of contract price, fuel cost, heat rates, spreads, and the cost of cover. So, in order to evaluate the profitability of a contract, you need to consider all of these parameters combinedly. In a nutshell, the revenue from the contract shall be greater than the money required for covering the fuel costs, other marginal costs, and the cost of cover, if any. Only in that case the contract will be profitable, otherwise there will be a loss. Up to this point, we have understood and secured the commercial side of the electricity trade. Now, the electricity has to reach from the generation plant of the seller, which is located at a different location than where it will be consumed by the buyer. This transportation will be through the transmission network, which has limited capacity. In this section, we will develop our understanding regarding the utilization of the limited capacity of the transmission network. A contract to sell power is not worth anything without the right to access the transmission system. Many systems with electricity markets are organized to provide open access, which means that all generators and loads are entitled to use the transmission system. However, the capacity of the transmission system is limited. So, who decides which party can use that capacity and when? It is essential for some central authority to coordinate the schedules of power generation and load on the system in order to assure they are mutually feasible. Some regions assign this responsibility to the regional owner of the transmission system. Others assign it to some other institution having the right to approve generation schedules and make direct changes to those schedules where necessary. In our context, this institution is the system operator. Even when the responsibility to manage the transmission system have been assigned to an institution, the question is still there that when many buyers and sellers of power are operating in a market and negotiate in bilateral contracts for power, how do those so many customized bilateral contracts being negotiated among the parties lead to a collection of generation schedules that are feasible for the transmission network? Meaning that all of those deals can be dispatched without any issue. What good is a deal to sell firm power if the system operator is going to declare at the last moment that delivery is not feasible? One option for the system operator is to sell physical transmission rights in order to ration capacity by using the market in these rights to ration capacity. When the generator and the load file their schedules for power delivery with the system operator, they must also file an accompanying physical transmission right. So long as they have a physical transmission right, the sale is valid and they will be able to make delivery. In that case, the purchase of power requires a simultaneous purchase of a transmission right. In evaluating competing offers from the different generators, a buyer of power must include in its calculation the cost of transmission. But there are some issues with the physical transmission rights. Power flows follows Kirchhoff law instead of contract law. The transmission capacity can't be determined by considering each transaction individually, but rather shall be considered collectively. We will try to understand this concept with the help of an example. This example illustrates the problem of using physical transmission rights, also called PTRs, to ration power flows on a transmission network. PTRs are designed to ensure that the total amount of power flowing over a transmission line does not exceed the line's capacity. However, PTRs do not take into account the laws of physics governing power flows, the Kirchhoff's law. As a result, PTRs can lead to curtailment, which means that some of the contracted deliveries will have to be reduced. In this example, there are two buses connected to a transmission line with a capacity of 60 megawatt. Both buses have load and both buses have generators. Contract 1 is for 80 megawatt of power delivered from generator 2 to load 1. Contract 2 is for 70 megawatt of power delivered from generator 1 to load 2. Both of the contracts are infeasible as they exceed the line capacity, and if we consider it in general terms, there would be 150 megawatt of power flow. However, if the contracts are executed together and we consider the physical laws instead of the contract laws, then only 10 megawatt of power actually flows over the transmission line. This is because these contracts are able to offset each other. So, this example shows that PTRs can be an ineffective way to ration power flows on a transmission network. A more effective approach would be to use a market based mechanism that takes into account the laws of physics. Due to this limitation, many countries have discontinued the use of PTRs to ration transmission capacity, and have adopted a more centralized approaches that optimizes the use of the transmission system based on the physical laws governing the use of electricity. Those mechanisms will be covered in upcoming modules in detail. Now, with the thorough discussion on the physical and commercial side in the previous sections, we turn our attention to the financial side of the deal. Whenever there is a deal between two parties, it is expected that both parties will honor their obligations. However, there is always a risk that one of the party may not be able to perform as per the agreement, and there might be a financial loss to the other party. This risk is called the credit risk, and in this section we will explore several concepts that are important to understand in analyzing and mitigating credit risks. As I said earlier, there is always a possibility that one of the party will not be able to perform on its obligation, and this risk is present in all types of contracts. Similar to the previous parts, that before going into details, first we will understand some key concepts and terms that are used in the industry. The first concept is the market value of a contract, which is the difference between the contract price and the market price. We will do this for a contract of firm power traded in a liquid market, ignoring all other specific features. It is also important to note that in these analysis, we take the view of one party, whether the buyer or the seller, and evaluate the risk of non-payment by the other party, also called the counterparty. For a simple contract with a single date for delivery of power, the market value of a contract to the seller can be represented as a discounted cash flow, where the market value to the seller is contract price minus the market price into the quantity multiplied by the discount factor. When the contract price equals the market price, we say that the contract is at the money. When the contract price is above the market price, we say that the contract is in the money. And when the contract price is below the market price, we say that the contract is out of the money. When a contract is in the money and the other party defaults, there will be a financial loss, while in the out of the money contract, there will be no loss because the market price is higher than the contract price. Just to note that we are describing this from the perspective of the seller. This is all these definitions are from the perspective of the seller. For the buyer, it will be the opposite. A contract that is in the money for the seller will be out of the money for the buyer, and vice versa. Another important term used in the industry is the current exposure, which is a measure of the potential loss that a party would incur if the counterparty defaults. If the market value to the seller is positive, meaning that the contract is in the money for the seller, then the current exposure is also positive, which means that there is a risk of financial loss in case of the counterparty default. However, if the market value to the seller is negative, meaning that the contract is out of the money for the seller, then the current exposure is zero, because there is no financial loss as the market price is already greater than the contract price. It is also important to understand that exposure does not mean a loss. Exposure is just a calculation of the size of potential loss. Even if the counterparty were to default, there would probably be some recovery of what is owed, so that the realized loss would be less than the exposure. Different countries have different bankruptcy rules, and different deals will contain various provisions to protect both parties. These will all impact the likelihood of payment and therefore of loss, and exposure calculation is just a starting point. The current exposure measure the potential loss at some specific time while the contract is signed for a duration. A long term deal that is currently at the money or out of the money and therefore has zero current exposure will nevertheless have a positive potential future exposure. Although the market price currently equals or is lower than the deal's price, but that can change. The market price might decrease in the future before the delivery is made, putting the contract in the money to the seller. At that future date, the seller would have a positive current exposure. At the signing of the deal, when it is at the money or out of the money and has a zero current exposure, it has a positive potential future exposure. This is true for both parties, the seller or the buyer. So, the potential future exposure is the maximum value of the current exposure during the entire horizon of the contract. In defining potential future exposure, we said that it is the maximum of the potential current exposures calculated for different time horizon throughout the deal. That is not literally true. For the seller, it would be tough to define a true maximum. The potential current exposure increases with the price. So, where is the limit? In practice, the potential future exposure is defined statistically. It is a high but unlikely number. Another obvious feature of potential future exposure that we can deduce from our previous discussion is that it increases with the time horizon of the deal. The further forward is the obligation, the chances are greater that the contract will at some point be deep in the money and it will have a positive credit exposure. So, other things being equal, forward contracts have a higher potential future exposure than spot contracts, and long term forward contracts have a higher potential future exposure than short term forward contracts. Therefore, credit risk increases with the length of the contract term. This is one reason why spot markets are more liquid than forward markets, and that the liquidity of forward market declines with maturity. Although credit risk is an inherent feature of a robust market, it is an expensive risk and costly to manage. So, the increased credit risk of long horizon markets is manifested in those markets being thinner and in the long term markets being favored to parties with better credit rating. Now, let us understand this concept with the help of an example in which a party signs a deal to sell 100 megawatt of power at a price of $45 per megawatt hour. The current spot market price of power is also $45 per megawatt hour. The contract is at the money and the market value is 0 to both the buyer and the seller. In this case, the current exposure of both the buyer and the seller is 0. Now, let us consider a scenario where the power has been delivered, but payment has not yet been received. In this case, the seller's exposure becomes $45 per megawatt hour, totaling $4,500. Meanwhile, the buyer remains unexposed until the payment is received. Moving on, if the power has not been delivered but the spot market price shifts to $35 per megawatt hour, the seller exposure changes to $10 per megawatt hour, amounting to 1000 in total. Despite this, the buyer retains a zero current exposure as no power has been delivered yet. In a contrasting scenario, if the power has not been delivered and the spot price rises to $51 per megawatt hour, rendering the contract out of the money for the seller, a noteworthy change occurs. Surprisingly, the seller's current exposure drops to 0. However, in this situation, the buyer develops a current exposure of $6 per megawatt hour or 600 in total. Lastly, let us consider a forward contract where 200 megawatt of power is contracted to be sold at $66 per megawatt hour, scheduled for a delivery 1 year from now. If the current spot market price is $67 per megawatt hour and the 1 year forward price is $65 per megawatt hour, a straightforward calculation based on the spot price would be erroneous. The seller in this instant has a current exposure of $1 per megawatt hour, totaling $200, because it shall be compared with the forward price, not the current spot price. Instead of simply accepting the increased credit risk on forward contracts, parties always look for mitigation measures such as signing deals with parties having good credit ratings or incorporation of provisions into the contract to reduce the credit risk. This can include posting of collateral based on changes in the market price. These are some options, and there are others which are greatly discussed in the financial risk management courses, which is beyond the scope of this module. So, in conclusion, credit risk is an inherent feature of all contracts, and there are measures available to reduce or mitigate this risk. In all our previous discussions, like the credit risk, the cost of cover, our underlying assumption was a standardized contract with no contingencies defined. Now, we turn our attention towards these structured contracts, which are more detailed as compared to the standardized contracts. In this part, we will cover several types such as the power purchase agreements, PPAs, capacity sales, tolling agreements, and full requirement contracts. Structured contracts. By their definition, structured contracts are designed in such a way that suits the needs of both parties. Even in structured contracts, parties still use some kind of standardized template which are common in markets instead of reinventing the wheel. The most important terms are customized as per the requirements of the parties, while the rest of terms remain standardized as per the customary practice of the market. Using a standardized template is beneficial because it will be easily understood by everyone and will also be in accordance with the legal system of the country. Structured contracts offer several advantages. One of the advantages is their flexibility, which allows the parties to tailor the deal as per the specific requirements of the parties. By doing this, both parties are able to strike a deal which fits their requirement. Another advantage is the risk reduction, because the customization allows the parties to tailor the terms and conditions which are mutually beneficial and agreed upon, and as such there will be less risk of disagreements and disputes. It should also be kept in mind that with the customization you will be foregoing some of the advantages of standardization, such as liquidity and easy negotiations. These are some classical types of structured contracts which we will cover in this part. Let us discuss the power purchase agreements first. These standardized contracts that we discussed in the previous part can be considered as the simplest form of power purchase agreements. But in usual terms, the PPA refer to a structured contract. Structured PPAs are often negotiated before a new generation plant is built. The successful negotiation of a PPA confirms that there is a need for the installation of a new generation plant, and it also assures the profitability of the investment. With a PPA in hand, the company that is developing the new plant can more easily finance the construction. Like in Pakistan, the financial close is achieved only when PPA is signed. The PPA specifies that an LSE will purchase some amount of plant's output over a long period of time, which could be 5, 10 or 20 years or more. Although PPAs have many features, but we will focus on the most important ones, that are contingencies that affect generation and other elements of performance, and number 2, price. Now, how uncertainties are managed in PPAs. A key term in all PPAs is the specification of the conditions under which delivery will be made or not. This specification determines which party bears the risk of certain contingencies. For example, a generation owner may want to sell its output under a long-term contract, but he knows that its generator will occasionally have an unplanned outage. The buyer, on the other hand, may want a commitment to get the power under all circumstances. If the contract is written as firm, this protects the buyer and gives the risk of the unit outage to the seller. Alternatively, the contract could be written as unit firm, specifying the generator that will produce the power and providing an allowance for the non-delivery in case the generator unexpectedly fails or the transmission network around the generator goes out. In Pakistan, this is similar to the force outage allowance. This protects the generation owner but leaves the buyer with some risk. Unit firm contracts are meant to provide an allowance for the normal ups and downs of a well maintained power plant and do not give the generator a freedom to perform badly. They usually contain some sort of compensation or price adjustment if the availability of the generator is especially poor than the agreed benchmark. The contract can give the plant owner flexibility to schedule regular maintenance and may give the buyer some rights in that scheduling so as to assure that it is getting the power when it needs it. A unit firm contract can make sense to a utility looking for a supply of power for its customers. After all, if the utility owned the generator outright, it would also bear the risk of an outage, including the risk of equipment failure or other obstacles to delivery. The unit firm contract substitutes for being the owner of the plant. It relieves the utility of the responsibility for maintenance and operation, putting these in the hands of the generator owner who can perform this task more efficiently. The difference between a firm and a unit firm contract is a starting point for you to appreciate the wide array of contingencies that can be specified in a contract. We will not go into any further details here and you can explore this further on your own. Another key element in the contracts is the price formula in a PPA. While it is possible for a PPA to set a firm and fixed price for all deliveries, however, while it is possible for a PPA to set a firm and fixed price for all deliveries, however, that is not wise often. In the previous parts, we have already seen that the credit risk of a contract increases with the increase in the time horizon for delivery. And as you know that structured PPAs often have a very long tenure, so fixing the price can create significant potential future exposure. Credit risk can be reduced by indexing the price on deliveries so that the contract is never too deep in the money nor too far out of the money. This reduces the potential future exposure because the price in the PPA stays close to the market price, keeping the cost of cover low. PPAs come with all variety of price formulas. However, there are two classic types of formulas used in. Number one is the fuel index formulas, where the PPA price is tied to the market price of the fuel, such as the natural gas or coal. The second type is electricity price index PPAs, where the PPA price is tied to the market price of electricity at some well-known hub or other location. In order for the index to work, it must be readily observable by both the seller and the buyer. So, it must be a publicly quoted price. Another important consideration for setting price formulas in a PPA is to establish the right incentives in a contract that reward performance and penalizes failure. For example, a PPA between a load serving entity and a renewable power project such as a concentrating solar facility or a wind farm will establish a base price for each year and then will establish a set of premiums and discounts applied for power delivered during different hours of the day. Power delivered during peak hours is more valuable and useful to the LSC and these hours could receive a premium. Power delivered during off-peak hours is less valuable and useful and not as useful to the LSC and these hours receive a discount. The price formula effectively establishes incentive for the meager The price formulas effectively establishes incentive for the manager of the project to maintain as so as to maximum the production during peak hours. The price formula effectively establish incentives for the manager of the project to maintain it so as to maximize the production during peak hours. In conclusion, structured PPAs play a foundational role in the power industry as it enhances predictability and ensures security of investments. At the cost of losing some of the advantages of the standardization, the structured PPAs offer flexibility to tailor the contracts as per the requirements of the parties and hence reduce certain risks such as the potential future exposure. Now, let us talk about the second type of the structured contracts, which are called capacity sales. In the previous modules, you have already learnt about the resource adequacy problem, meaning that there shall be enough capacity installed in the system to serve the system needs currently as well as in the future. In a vertically integrated utilities model, as was the historical arrangement of the power industry, this utility was responsible for long-term planning and assuring that sufficient capacity is installed to meet the future load. The same utility will build and own the generation capacity needed to assure resource adequacy. These power plants would then generate the necessary energy when needed. With the advent of markets, now this utility can buy the energy from other utilities. But what about capacity? If the utility started relying too much on purchase of energy from elsewhere, was it not also relying on capacity from elsewhere? If energy can be sold under a bilateral contract, why not also capacity? There is no reason that capacity must be self-owned. Capacity can also be purchased. The rules of the resource adequacy are set by a central institution responsible for the system and market operations, which is the generic ISO in majority of the markets. A very key element of the capacity contract is that it is very specific about the generation plant. The plant who have sold capacity must make it available at the time of requirement as specified by the ISO. There will also be some testing involved to assure that the capacity can be actually delivered. A capacity contract may or may not include the energy component. If it is not included, then the generation owner is free to sell the energy in the market as long as it respects the terms of the capacity agreement. Many PPAs are simultaneously contracts for energy as well as capacity, but many are just a contract for energy without a capacity component. So, capacity sale is a process for selling of the ability of power plant to generate energy when required. In some of the cases, that energy may not be produced when the expected demand does not grow to the level of expectation. So, how does capacity sales work? There are several methods of the buying and selling of capacity, but the most frequent method is the centralized auctions for capacity held by the ISOs, in which the generators bid their capacity into the auction and buyers such as utilities and energy traders purchase the capacity that they need to meet their resource adequacy obligations. The price of the capacity is determined by the market forces, and there are several factors that influence it, such as the cost of building and operating of plants, the availability of fuel, and the expected level of demand for electricity. Now about the importance. You have understood the concept of capacity sales. The benefits are much obvious now, which include ensuring resource adequacy and promoting investments in new power plants, as the capacity sales will provide additional revenue over and above the energy market revenues. Another interesting type of the structured contracts is the tolling agreements, which offer a unique way to sell the services of the power plant without selling the plant itself. In this unique arrangement, the owner of the generation facility continues to maintain the generator and employs the necessary personnel to operate the facility. However, The customer, which is also known as the toller, decides when they want to use the facility to generate electricity. The toller pays for the fuel and sell the electricity in the market. In this way, they are well positioned to respond to the market dynamics. In our previous part, while calculating the spreads, we used different types of heat rates, and that greatly impacted the profitability of the generation plant. And you already know that the heat rate is greatly impacted by how well the plant is being maintained. As in the tolling agreement, the O&M is the responsibility of the generation owner, and therefore, in order to build the right incentives into the contract, the tolling agreement specify a contract heat rate. By doing this, the toller is entitled to certain amount of energy for a specified amount of fuel. The facility owner bears the risk of plant's efficiency. This incentivizes the right behavior. If the facility owner does a good job in O&M, it may exceed the contract heat rate and will pocket the savings. And if it does not maintain the plant as needed, the heat rate may get deteriorated and the owner will get the hit for it. The contract price in a tolling agreement is usually paid in two parts. One is called the capacity charge and the other is called the tool charge. The capacity charge is an amount paid for the control of the capacity over a given window of time. The toller pays a fee and in return gets control over the capacity of the generation facility for a specified period of time. This charge will only be paid if the generation facility was available, and hence it ensures the availability of the capacity. The tool charge is paid by the toller in an amount of per unit of electricity generated, considering the fuel cost, contract heat rate and variable O&M costs. Besides power industry, these tolling contracts are common in many commodity industries. For example, an owner of a copper smelter offers its services to any toller who wishes to process copper ore and takes the refined product. Now, let's talk about the dispatch of the power plants under a tolling agreement. The profitability of this contract and hence the decision by the toller whether to dispatch the plant or not will totally depend on how the price of the fuel, for example natural gas, and the price of electricity move. And you already understand from the previous parts that these price movements are captured and translated into meaningful information by the spread. When the spread is negative, the toller will not want to generate any electricity. When the spread becomes positive enough, meaning the market price of electricity is greater than the tolling charge, then the toller will want to dispatch. Therefore, the value of the tolling agreement depends on the plant spread, and you already know that the spread is the function of the plant's heat rate or thermal efficiency, the price of the fuel and the price of electricity. The lower the plant's heat rate, the higher the profit. Knowing this, the owner of the plant will probably demand higher capacity charge for a plant with lower heat rate. Let's solidify our understanding with the help of an example. In this case, a 500 megawatt generation facility has been obtained by a toller through a tolling agreement with the parameters as shown. Now, to calculate its intrinsic value, there is a forecast that the price will be €55 per megawatt hour in the peak hours, and there will be a total of 352 peak hours in a month. So, during these peak hours, the generator can produce 176,000 megawatt hours by operating at full capacity and will use 9680,000 MMBTU of gas. This value can be calculated from the heat rate of the generation plant. This is very important to note here that the amount of gas consumed is calculated from the contract heat rate, not the actual one, which might be lower or higher, meaning that the plant's efficiency risk is parked on the generation owner. Based on the market price of 55 and the generation of 176,000, the gross revenue becomes 9680,000. Based on the gas price, the total amount of fuel cost is 7920,000. By subtracting this from the gross revenue, the net amount is 1760,000. But the toller has to pay two other charges as well. One is the capacity charge and the other is tool charge, which are calculated as per the terms of the agreement. The capacity charge is the multiplication of capacity charge and the maximum capacity, and the tool charge is the multiplication of tolling fee and the number of units produced. By calculating this, we remain with the net profit of 232. So, this is how the tolling agreement works. Please note that in this month the toller is in profit, but there will be many months where the toller may not be able to recover the capacity charges. So, the overall profitability will depend on the long term analysis of the contract. Please note that we will also share the Excel version of this example, where the formulas for these calculations will be embedded for your understanding. The previous example was regarding the intrinsic value of the contract, where a lot of parameters were considered as fixed. However, evaluating the full value of a tolling agreement involves considering various contingencies such as market price fluctuations, failure of the plant, etc. Identifying the optimal operating strategy under different conditions is also very crucial for maximizing value of the contract. Properly accounting for risks is complex and is similar to valuing a complex call option in financial markets, which is beyond the scope of this module. So, this is just a flavor that you can explore the details on your own. Although the toller has the right to use the capacity as per its operating strategy, however, this right is not in blank and has certain limitations, as frequent starts and stops can increase wear and tear on plant's machinery, leading to higher operating and maintenance costs. So, the tolling agreements often include limitations on the number of starts and may impose extra charges for excessive starts, aligning operational decisions with cost management. The toller has to take these costs and limitations into account on top of the spread in making dispatch decisions. From the previous discussions, now the benefits of the tolling agreements are quite evident, as it reduces the exposure of the generation owner to the market risks related to electricity and fuel price spreads. The toller bears these risks. It also ensures the minimum income for the plant's owner in terms of the capacity payments, which can be used as a useful collateral for financing the construction of the power plant. While for the toller, it does not have to build the plant by itself and maintain it, rather it can pay a fee for utilization of a plant that is already built and maintained by someone expert in this field. In conclusion, the tolling agreements are very interesting and unique type of power purchase contracts which offer flexibility, allocate risks and provide financial stability, and participants shall carefully evaluate the risk and opportunities associated with a tolling agreement before entering into such kind of agreements. Another most commonly used type of structured contracts is the full requirement contract. Some customers, such as large industrial or commercial customers whose primary business is something different, such as manufacturing or commercialization, they may be interested to outsource the purchase of their power needs to third parties, which are also called the wholesale marketers, through full requirement contracts. Under a full requirement contract, a wholesale marketer contracts to provide customers with their full requirements, which may vary from day to day and month to month. The customer is isolated from the market and the whole responsibility is assumed by the wholesale marketer. These contracts include all the requirements of the buyer, including capacity, energy, or ancillary services. Like in any other customized contract, the price could be fixed or vary by the hour or follow some specific formula. Now, what are the major challenges for the wholesale marketer? In order to provide this service on a competitive basis, the wholesale marketer must master a number of skills. It must have the capability to manage and analyze large amount of data and must have the necessary IT infrastructure. The marketer must also have the capabilities to forecast the load and load patterns over the term of the contract, as it will impact its costs to source power at different times. Second, the wholesale marketer must master the administrative task of arranging delivery of the power. It must know the protocols and procedures of the system and markets in which it operates and delivers its power. It shall also have the capability of measuring and monitoring delivery and prices. It shall also be executing the relevant back office tasks to bill the customers and pay for the power and other system costs. Third, it must know the wholesale market and the cost of sourcing power from different generators. This will include an understanding of congestion of the transmission network that may shape the cost of delivering power to the customer. If the power has to be delivered to a customer located behind a constraint, the cost will be different than others which are not impacted by these constraints. We will further discuss this aspect in the upcoming parts. For the wholesale marketer, there are several risks that it needs to cope with and manage it properly in order to make its business viable. The first risk is the market price risk. If he is sourcing power for the contract from the market, if the wholesale market price turns out to be higher than what the marketer had anticipated, then its margin on the contract will be squeezed or may turn negative and he will incur losses. As we will see in the next section, that electricity wholesale prices can spike very high, reaching into the thousands of dollars per megawatt hour. So, the margin can become very negative, meaning huge losses. The second risk is the volume risk, as the revenues of the contract are dependent on the consumption of the buyer, which may turn out to be higher or lower than anticipated, especially when it is a sizable utility. The variations can be huge. Depending upon the terms of the contract and how the marketer arranges to serve the load, this will translate into a higher or lower profit than anticipated. It is also an interesting phenomena that the two risks are interrelated. A higher demand means higher market price and a lower demand means lower price. For example, a hot summer may drive the demand of the utility who have signed the full requirement contract with the wholesale marketer. However, it will also drive the demand of other utilities as well, which will drive the market price up. Now, if the marketer is dependent on the wholesale market, it will have to purchase the power at a higher price. Similar is the case in a warm winter, which will drive the demand lower and hence lower market price. The marketer can source power at cheaper rates than expected. However, there is no demand for such cheaper power. So, these are the kind of risks that have to be managed by the wholesale marketers. As we have understood that there are risks with significant impacts on the profitability of contracts, so the wholesale marketer must look for ways to mitigate those risks. The marketer must evaluate these risks while deciding the price of the contracts. The second action that the marketer will take when it signs a full requirement contract it will simultaneously make arrangements to service it through purchase of the required amount from generators through PPAs to lock the prices in advance, so that it is not too much dependent on the market price. In this case, the profit margin on the full requirement contract depends on the cost of these matching arrangements as well as on the marketer's own operating costs. The understanding of the regulatory environment in which this contract is being signed is also very important. For example, if the wholesale marketer has signed a full requirement contract with the utility may have a stable customer base and it will be easier to forecast. However, if consumer have the choice to switch from one utility to the other, the customer base will not be stable and customer migration needs to be taken into account because it will impact the volume. In fact, this contract will greatly impact the customer migration. The contract price should be fair as per expectations. Although it will be favorable or unfavorable at any particular time with respect to the market price. Sometimes the contract price will be higher than the market price and sometimes it will be lower. However, these both scenarios shall balance each other. If the contract price is higher in majority of the cases, then the customers of the utility will be paying higher prices as compared to the market price and may switch to another utility who is sourcing power in the market. So, with this we have covered all the types of contracts, and now we will cover some market fundamentals. Up to now, we have covered in detail the intricacies of the bilateral contracts, which included features, profitability and risks. But these contracts are not signed in isolation. Majority of these contracts are executed in regions where the competitive markets are well established. As we have seen in calculations of the spreads and the current exposures, that these markets have greater influence on the terms and conditions and the profitability of these contracts. So, in this part, we will introduce some basic concepts of the competitive markets, and the detailed working of these markets will be covered in the next submodule of this session. The first fundamental concept is regarding the market price, that how it is discovered. Well, the wholesale market price is a reflection of the underlying fundamentals of supply and demand. Understanding these fundamentals and the way they influence wholesale electricity prices is very important. The key principle underlying most analysis of electricity market price dynamics is that price in any hour should equal to the marginal cost of generation, and you already know from the previous sessions that the marginal cost of generation is the variable cost to be incurred on production of the additional units, which is equal to the fuel cost plus the variable O&M costs. The marginal cost of generation fluctuates for many different reasons. However, we will open this discussion with a short illustration of how fluctuations in load translate into a fluctuating price through different hours of the day. We will then move our discussion towards models of how changing costs and other factors translate into shifts in the average price over time. This fluctuation is normally visualized through a curve called the merit order curve, in which the generation technologies are ordered with respect to their variable costs, which is essentially the same as the conventional supply curve. This is a typical representation of the merit order curve. On the x axis, we have the megawatt, and on y axis, we have the price. The blue line represents the generation technologies with respect to per unit cost. So, we have the specific quantum available from each type of technology at a specific cost. The red line represents the demand for any particular hour, and the intersection of these two lines will set the market price. As we are only analyzing the impact of the variations in demand, so we will keep the supply curve as the same, and draw various lines of demand on the supply curve. If we draw a line to the left of the red line, it means that the demand is lower and hence the resulting marginal price will also be lower. And if we draw the line on the right side of the red line, it means that the demand is higher and the resulting marginal price will also be higher. So, what we have observed is that the higher the demand, the higher will be the market price, and the lower the demand, the lower will be the market price. Now, let us keep the demand the same and see the impact of the supply curve. Let us assume that a huge nuclear plant trips suddenly. So, what will happen to the supply curve? The supply curve shifts to the left. From this new supply curve, we can see that the new market price will be higher as compared to the previous one. Another scenario could be that a large coal generator suddenly becomes available for dispatch. In this case, the new supply curve will be the supply curve has shifted to the right and the resulting marginal price will also be lower as compared to the previous case. So, we can see that even with the same demand, when the supply is less, the price will be higher, and if the supply is more, the price will be lower. Here are some key definitions that are used in the power industry. The generator that sets the marginal price is called the marginal generator, and the generators having variable costs lower than the marginal generator are called the inframarginal generators. As the market price is equal to the variable cost of the marginal generator, so it will be only getting revenues to cover its variable cost, while the inframarginal generators will be getting revenues over and above their variable costs to cover their fixed costs. Now, the question arises that how the generator at the end of the supply curve will cover their fixed costs. The margins here may not be sufficient and the last generator has no margin. Here comes the concept of scarcity pricing. When the demand is so high that there is not enough supply available and you have to respond to other means such as activating reserves or doing load shedding, then the price is no longer set by the intersection of the demand and supply because they do not intersect, but it is rather set by an administrative measure. This concept is called scarcity pricing, and the hours during which this pricing is active is called the scarcity pricing hours. Let's understanding with the help of the same graph. What if the demand is above the supply curve? Well, in this case, there is no generator that can set the marginal price. In that case, the prices will be set administratively, which is normally equal to the value of lost load, which is value determined through customer surveys. In this period, all the peak generators can cover their fixed costs. However, it is very risky for any generator if it is too much dependent on the scarcity hours because the prices are very high and the number of hours are very less. So, if there is any outage in this period, it will lose a huge quantum of revenues. That is why generators look for other avenues to cover their fixed cost. For example, putting some fixed cost in their bilateral contracts. Another important concept is the supply stack model. In the supply stack model, the supply of any commodity such as electricity, gas or oil is represented in the order of increasing marginal cost. The marginal cost of different technologies is taken as the average and stacked in the order of increasing marginal cost. There are several uses of the supply stack model. In short term, the ISOs use it for dispatch purposes and setting marginal prices as we discussed previously. While its actual use is in the medium and long term, where ISOs, energy companies and policymakers intend to analyze the impacts of different dynamics on the market prices. Now, let's explain this with the help of an example. As we discussed in our previous example of the impact of changes in the supply curve on the marginal price, well, the same analogy will be used by an ISO to report the change in market price if there is some retirement or new addition in the system. An energy company will also make its retirement decision of its plant or making new investment by analyzing the impacts in medium to long term by taking the averages over those periods. The earlier analysis was for short term, while this analysis will take the averages over a longer periods. Another important use of the supply stack model is to analyze the impact of multiple factors. This is an illustrative supply stack for the Mid-Atlantic region in 2008 with the high natural gas costs. There is a lot of coal and the share of RE is very small. From 2008 till 2015, natural gas prices fell down significantly. The prices in 2015 were almost one-third of the prices in 2008. With these new realities, the illustrative supply stack for the Mid-Atlantic region in 2015 changes its shape. The natural gas generation displaces coal in the supply stack model due to its lower marginal cost, and you can also see that the coal capacity also got retired and the cost dynamics have changed. Also, there is a reduction in the average load. So, the average price in 2015 reflects the impacts of interplay of all of these factors. Now, adding 25 gigawatt of zero marginal cost VRE generation to the supply stack reduces further the market clearing price that all generators receive, making it more difficult for higher fixed cost generators such as nuclear power to maintain profitability. So, in conclusion, the supply stack model depicts the changes in the underlying fundamental that impact the price of electricity in the medium to long term and can be used by the ISOs, the energy companies and the government for making different decisions. Now that we have understood the impacts of changes in the underlying fundamentals of the electricity prices, so as a last part of this submodule, let's discuss some particular features of the electricity prices. In this part, we will discuss these three distinctive features of electricity prices, that is spikes and time varying volatility, mean reversion and locational basis. Price spikes are the occasional but very extreme fluctuations in the cost of electricity. This is a typical example of wholesale electricity prices in which the prices fluctuates around an average for majority of the time. However, occasionally the variations are very large. These large variations are called the price spikes. These price spikes contribute greatly to the electricity price volatility, but these are not the cause of the volatility itself. These price spikes are the results of the interplay of several underlying factors that impact the electricity wholesale prices. There are several factors that contribute to the price volatility. One of the most important driver of price volatility is the supply and demand imbalances. As sudden shifts in supply and demand can lead to immediate and substantial price fluctuations. First, there is the inflexibility of the demand. In most systems, the wholesale demand curve is very inelastic, for example, very steep. Demand management and demand response programs still provide only limited flexibility, and this flexibility is also at significant cost. Further flexibility requires load shedding, and the value of lost load is also very high. Second, there is the shape of the typical supply stack like this one. It is generally flat or gently sloping over a large region, but as we move rightward and approach the limit of capacity, it switches and becomes extremely steep. The high cost peaker plants have very high marginal costs. When load is low and intersects the supply curve at the lower left portion, changes in load produce very small changes in price. However, when the load is high and intersects the supply curve at the upper right portion, changes in load produce extremely large changes in price. This explains why the price occasionally spikes upward. Third, there are the dynamic constraints on changing the output at any generator. For example, surges in renewable generation must be balanced by a reduction in generation from other resources, such as thermal generators. If these thermal generators are not sufficiently flexible, they may prefer to continue generation even when the price temporarily becomes negative. Although they suffer the temporary operation loss, they avoid the cost of shutting down and restarting. Therefore, in order to balance supply with load, it may be necessary for the price to fall dramatically. This explains why the price occasionally spikes downward also. Another important factor are the grid congestion and limitations, which can result in localized price spikes, especially in regions where infrastructure is limited. The design and rules of the electricity market also significantly impact price volatility, with competitive markets generally exhibiting greater fluctuations. Electricity prices also exhibit time varying volatility, meaning that there are periods of higher volatility and there are periods of lower volatility. This time varying volatility comes in two forms. First, there are predictable periods, most of which are associated with the predictable calendar patterns of load as discussed in the previous modules. In hours of the day, when load is low, variation in load produce only small changes in the price, whereas in hours of the day when load is high, variation in load produce large changes in price. In regions with seasonal peaks of load, for example, hot summers and very cold winters, volatility will also be seasonally higher. Price spikes are essentially just the most extreme manifestation of this pattern, with certain regions having a greater likelihood of spikes in peak summers or winter periods. The second form of time varying volatility are the unpredictable but lasting periods of unusually high volatility. For example, if some major disruption occurs such as an unplanned outage of a major nuclear reactor or failure of key natural gas pipeline or other infrastructure such as transmission line, it shifts the supply stack leftward so that load intersects this steep region more often. In systems with a large volume of hydropower, The volume and duration of spikes may increase when reservoir levels are low. The increased volatility lasts until the disruption is resolved and the supply stack shifts rightward again. The factors that cause spikes are also persistent in this way. For example, the underlying cause of a set of large price spike may be a weather pattern such as heat wave driving high use of air conditioning, which recreates the conditions for the spike over several days at a time. Another notable feature of electricity prices is the mean reversion. The mean reversion is the tendency for electricity prices to return to their long term average. Besides electricity, it is present in all types of commodity prices. Like for the price spikes, there are several factors that contribute to this phenomena. Number one is that the shifts in demand and supply are temporary, and as these factors return to normal, the prices also return to normal. Number two is the storage of commodities. Storage of commodities moderates these temporary fluctuations, but storage is seldom without cost, and it is also not unlimited, and therefore mean reversion is typical. In electricity, storage remains very expensive relative to other commodities at this point. So, an even large share of the large volatility we observe is driven by temporary factors, and reversion to the mean is even more predictable. The fact that price spikes disappear quickly is just the most extreme example of this mean reversion. The calendar factors that drive load also intersect with the patterns of mean reversion. Instead of having a single mean to which prices revert, the mean varies with the hour of the day and season of the year. The last feature that we will discuss in this session is the locational basis of electricity prices. By definition, the difference between the price of the same commodity at the same time but different locations is called the locational basis. The most obvious example from the Pakistan perspective is the price of petroleum. It is different in Karachi as compared to Islamabad, and the prices in Gilgit will be different from both the Islamabad and Karachi. The main difference is due to the transportation costs. The basis can be negative or positive depending on which value is subtracted from which one. However, in majority of the markets, certain locations become the benchmarks and the basis for other locations is measured with respect to that benchmark. These benchmarks are called the price hubs. As I mentioned earlier as well, the Henry hub is the price hub for gas market in US. So, what factors influence the locational basis? Like in petroleum, the reason for the locational basis in electricity price is also the medium of transportation, that is the transmission network. There are two aspects of the transmission network which are the drivers for the locational basis in electricity prices. The first one is the congestion, which means that the interconnection capacity is limited and power can't flow to an area beyond certain limit. However, the load in that area is greater and now some expensive local generation has to be dispatched in order to meet that load. This caused the price difference between the area and other areas in the network. The second aspect is the losses in the transmission network, which you already know from the previous sessions that it is the real cost of delivering electricity. In zonal and nodal systems, the losses do affect the prices. However, it is not the major contributor to locational basis as compared to congestion. So, with this, allow me to conclude this submodule with the following remarks. We have understood that bilateral contracts can coexist with variety of market structures such as utility procuring additional generation or wholesale marketers signing bilateral contracts with consumers and generators. These bilateral contracts play a vital role in the development of competitive markets. However, these bilateral markets still suffer from the coordination issues, which has limited their contribution to the industry. For example, the buyers and sellers have to find each other and negotiate deals, but still their deals must be validated by a central authority to check their feasibility with the transmission network. So, in the next submodule, we will discuss how centralized markets can be used to increase the usefulness of trading in general. You will also see how centralization in certain markets can be connected to the bilateral markets to realize its full potential.